Dwemer Lore, Part 1. Ancient Scrolls of the Dwemer, 1A, The Ransom of Zarek, Part 1, by Marobar Sul. Jalamil stood in her garden and read the letter her servant had brought to her. The bouquet of roses in her hand fell to the ground. For a moment it was as if all birds had ceased to sing and a cloud had passed over the sky. Her carefully cultivated haven seemed to flood over with darkness. "We have thy son," it read. "We will be in touch with thee shortly with our ransom demands." Zarek had never made it as far as Argun after all. One of the brigands on the road, orcs probably, or a cursed Dunmer, must have seen his well-appointed carriage and taken him hostage. Jalamil clutched at the post for support, wondering if her boy had been hurt. He was but a student, not the sort to fight well against well-armed men, but had they beaten him, it was more than her mother's heart could bear. "Don't tell me they sent the ransom note so quickly," called a familiar voice, and a familiar face appeared through the hedge. It was Zarek! Jalamil hurried to embrace her boy, tears running down her face. "What happened?" she cried. "I thought thou had been kidnapped." "I was," said Zarek. "3 huge soaring Nords attacked my carriage on the Brimvorn Pass. Brothers, as I learned, named Matthias, Ullin, and Korg. Thou shouldst have seen these men, mother. Each one of them would have had trouble fitting through the front door, I can tell thee." "What happened?" Jalamil repeated. "Wert thou rescued?" "I thought about waiting for that, but I knew they'd send off a ransom note, and I know how thou dost worry. So I remembered what my mentor Argun always said about remaining calm, observing thy surroundings, and looking for thy opponent's weakness." Zarek grinned. "It took a while, though, because these fellows were truly monsters. And then when I listened to them bragging to one another, I realized that vanity was their weakness." "What didst thou do?" "They had me chained at their camp in the woods not far from Kael on High Knoll, overlooking a wide river. I heard one of them, Kurg, telling the others that it would be better part of an hour to swim across the river and back. They were nodding in agreement when I spoke up. I could swim that river faster and back in 30 minutes, I said. "Impossible," said Kurg. "I can swim faster than a little whelp like thee." So it was agreed that we would dive off the cliff, swim to the center island, and return. As we went to our respective rocks, Kurg took it upon himself to lecture me about all the fine points of swimming, the importance of synchronized movements of the arms and legs for maximum speed, and how essential it was to breathe after only the 3rd or 4th stroke, not too often to slow thyself down, but not too little to lose one's air. I nodded and agreed to all his fine points. Then we dove off the cliffs. I made it to the island and back in a little over an hour, but Kurg never returned. He had dashed his brains at the rocks at the base of the cliff. I had noticed the telltale signs of underwater rocks, and had taken the diving rock to the right. "But thou returned?" asked Jalamil, astounded. "Was that not when thou escaped?" "It was too risky to escape then," said Zarek. "They could have easily caught me again, and I wasn't keen to be blamed for Kurg's disappearance. I said I did not know what had happened to him, and after some searching they decided he had forgotten about the race and had swum ashore to hunt for food. They could not see how I could have had anything to do with his disappearance, as fully visible as I was throughout my swim." The 2 brothers began making camp along the rocky cliff edge, picking an ideal location so that I would not be able to escape. One of the brothers, Matthias, began commenting on the quality of the soil and the gradual incline of the rock that circled the bay below. It was ideal, he said, for a foot race. I expressed my ignorance of the sport, and he was keen to give me the details of the proper technique for running a race. He made absurd faces, showing how one must breathe in through the nose and out through the mouth, how to bend one's knees with the proper angle of the rise, and the importance of sure foot placement. Most important, he explained, was that one must keep an aggressive but not too strenuous pace if one intends to win. It is fine to run in second place through the race, he said, provided one has the willpower and strength to pull out in the end. I was an enthusiastic student, and Matthias decided that we ought to run a race around the edge of the bay before night fell. Ullen told us to bring some firewood when we came back. We began at once down the path skirting the cliff below. I followed his advice about breath, gait, and foot placement, but I ran with all my power right from the start. Despite his much longer legs, I was a few paces ahead as we rounded the first corner. With his eyes on my back, Matthias did not see the gap in the rock that I jumped over. He plummeted over the cliff before he had a chance to cry out. I spent a few minutes gathering some twigs before I returned to Ullen at camp. Ancient Scrolls of the Dwemer, 1b, The Ransom of Zarek, Part 2. Now thou wert just showing off, Friend Jamalil. Surely thou wouldst have been a good time to escape. Thou might think so, agreed Zarek, but thou hast to see the topography, a few large trees and then nothing but shrubs. Ullen would have noticed my absence and caught up with me in no time, and I would have had a hard time to explain Matthias's absence. However, the brief forage around the area allowed me to observe some of the trees close up, and I could formulate my final plan. When I got back to the camp with a few twigs, I told Ullen that Matthias was slow coming along, dragging a large dead tree behind him. Ullen scoffed at his brother's strength, saying it would take him time to pull up a live tree by the roots and drop it on the bonfire. I expressed reasonable doubt. I'll show thee, he said, ripping up a 10-foot-tall specimen effortlessly. But that's scarcely a sapling, I objected. I thought thou could rip up a tree. His eyes followed mine to a magnificent, heavy-looking one at the edge of the clearing. Ullen grabbed it and began to shake it with tremendous force to loosen its roots from the dirt. With that, he loosed the hive from the uppermost branches, dropping it down onto his head. That was when I made my escape, mother, said Zarek in conclusion, showing a little schoolboy pride. While Matthias and Korg were at the base of the cliff, and Ullen was failing about, engulfed by a swarm. Jamalil embraced her son once again. Publisher's note. I was reluctant to publish Marabar Sul's Ancient Scrolls of the Dwemer, but when the University of Wilhelm Press asked me to edit this edition, I decided to use this as an opportunity to set the record straight once and for all. Scholars do not agree on the exact date of Marabar Sul's work, but it is generally agreed that they were written by the playwright Gore Film, famous for popular comedies and romances during the Second Era after the fall of the Riemann Empire. The current theory holds that Phelim heard a few genuine Dwemer tales and adapted them to the stage in order to make money, along with the rewritten versions of many of his own plays. Gore Phelim created the persona of Malabar Sul, who could translate the Dwemer language in order to add some sort of validity to the work and make it even more valuable to the gullible. Note that while Malabar Sul and his works became the subject of heated controversy, there are no reliable records of anyone actually meeting Marabar Sul, nor was there anyone of that name employed by the Mages Guild, the School of Julianus, or any other intellectual institution. In any case, the Dwemer in most of the tales of Malabar Sul bear little resemblance to the fearsome, unfathomable race that frightened even the Dunmer, Nords, and Red Guards into submission and built ruins that even now have yet to be understood. Ancient Scrolls of the Dwemer, 2. The Seed. The hamlet village of Lorik was a quiet, peaceful Dwemer community nestled in the grey and tan dunes and boulders of the Gieste. No vegetation of any kind grew in Lorik, though there were blackened vestiges of long-dead trees scattered throughout the town. Arriving by caravan, Kamida looked at her new home with despair. She was used to the forest lands of the north where her father's family had hailed from. Here, there was no shade, little water, and a great open sky. The land looked dead. Her mother's family took Kamida and her younger brother Neveth in, and they were very kind to the orphans, but she felt lonely in the alien village. It was not until she met an old Argonian woman who worked at the water factory that Kamida found a friend. Her name was Sigethe, and she said that her family had lived in Lorik centuries before the Dwemer arrived, when it was great and beauteous forest. "Why did the trees die?" asked Kamida. "When there were Argonians only in this land, we never cut the trees, for we had no need for fuel or wooden structures such as you possess. When the Dwemer came, we allowed them to use the plants as they needed them, provided they never touched the hist, which was sacred to us and to the land. For many years we lived peaceably. No one wanted for anything." "What happened?" "Some of your scientists discovered that by distilling certain tree sap, molding it and drying it, they could create a resilient kind of armor called resin," said Sigethe. "Most of the trees that grew here had very thin ichor in their branches, but not the hist. Many of them fairly glistened with sap, which made the Dwemer merchants greedy. They hired a woodsman named Durin to start clearing the sacred arbors for profit." The old Argonian woman looked to the dusty ground and sighed. "Of course, the Argonians cried out against it. It was our home, and the hist, once gone, would never return. The merchants reconsidered, but Durin took it on his own to break our spirit. He proved one terrible, bloody day that his prodigious skill with the axe could be used against people as well as trees. Any Argonian who stood in his way was hewn asunder. The Dwemer people of Lorik closed their doors and their ears to the cries of murder." "Horrible," gasped Kamida. "It is difficult to explain," said Sigethe, "but the deaths of our living ones was not nearly as horrible to us as the death of our trees. You must understand that to my people, the hist are where we come from and where we are going. Destroying our bodies is nothing. Destroying our trees annihilates us utterly. When Durin turned his axe on the hist, he killed the land. The water disappeared, the animals died, and all other life that the trees nourished crumbled and dried to dust." "Then why are you still here?" asked Kamida. "Why didn't you leave?" "We are trapped. I am one of the last of a dying people. Few of us are strong enough to live away from our ancestral groves, and sometimes, even now, there is a perfume in the air of Lorik that gives us life. It will not be long until we are all gone." Kamida felt the tears welling up in her eyes. "Then I will be alone in this horrible place with no trees and no friends." "We Argonians have an expression," said Sigethe with a sad smile, taking Kamida's hand. "The best soil for a seed is found in your heart." Kamida looked into the palm of her hand and saw that Sigethe had given her a small black pellet. It was a seed. "It looks dead." "It can only grow in one place in all Lorik," said the old Argonian. "Outside an old cottage in the hills outside of town. I cannot go there, for the owner would kill me on sight. Like all my people, I am too frail to defend myself now. But you can go there and plant the seed." "What will happen?" asked Kamida. "Will the hist return?" "No, but some part of their power will." That night, Kamida stole from her house and into the hills. She knew that the cottage Sigethe had mentioned. As she approached it, the door opened, and an old but powerfully built man appeared with a mighty axe slung over his shoulder. "What are you doing here, child?" he demanded. "In the dark, I almost took you to be a lizard man." "I've lost my way in the dark. I'm trying to get back to Lorik." "Be on your way, then." Do you have a candle I might have?" she asked piteously. "I've been walking in circles, and I'm afraid I'll only turn back here without the light." The old man grumbled and walked into his house. Quickly, Kamina dug a hole in the dry dirt and buried the seed as deeply as she could. He returned with a lit candle. "See you don't come back here," he growled, "or I'll chop you in half." He returned to his house. The next morning, when he awoke and opened the door, he found that his cottage was entirely sealed within an enormous tree. He picked up his axe and delivered a blow after blow to the wood, but he could never break through. He tried side chops, but the wood healed itself. He tried an upper chop, but the wood sealed. Much time went by before someone discovered old Duran's emaciated body lying in front of his open door, still holding his blunted, broken axe. What he'd been chopping with it was a mystery, but the rumor spread that the hiss sap was found on the blade. Shortly thereafter, small flowers began pushing up through the town's dry dirt. The hiss did not return, but at twilight, the shadows of great trees would fill the streets. I hope you've been enjoying these lore readings, and if you have, please do consider subscribing to the channel. Thanks for watching.